Hey guys, tonight we slip into the soft amber glow of an 1800s parlour, the kind where every candle is a little island of light and every shadow feels like it might be listening. You're standing just inside the doorway, not sure whether to adjust your hat or your heartbeat. Outside, the world smells of coal smoke and horse leather, but in here the air is perfumed faintly with beeswax polish, tea leaves, and maybe a hint of lavender that someone tucked into a bowl on the mantel. The clock ticks slow enough that you could swear it's trying to match the rhythm of your pulse, and yet you're supposed to look calm, collected, as if you weren't about to step into the strange, high-stakes game of 19th century romance. You probably won't survive this without sweating through at least one layer of clothing, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The parlour is small, maybe just 2 armchairs flanking a low table with a crocheted doily, a sofa upholstered in fabric that's somehow both scratchy and elegant, and a rug that muffles your footsteps. You don't sit until invited, that's rule number 1. And if you're a gentleman calling on a young lady, you're already aware that you've passed through more than just a door. You've entered a social arena with unspoken rules sharper than any sword. This is where courtship begins, not on the street, not at a dance, but in these enclosed spaces where conversation is the main form of entertainment. That means your words matter. In fact, they might matter more than your looks, your bank balance, or your skill with a waltz. Though let's be honest, those things help. Historians still argue whether the parlour was a democratic space where personalities could truly shine, or whether it was just another stage for wealth and status to flex in velvet curtains and mahogany armrests. You notice the candles, shorter than you'd expect, with their little flames bobbing slightly every time someone crosses the room. In the 19th century, candles weren't just lighting, they were mood setters, clock tickers, and subtle reminders that time was running out, because once they burned low, it was time for you to leave. No lingering until midnight. Propriety kept romance on a curfew. If you're the guest, you're trying to read every signal. Is the hostess smiling because she's genuinely charmed, or because she's a master of politeness? Did she just place you in the safe but not romantic category without you even knowing? The fringe tidbit here is that in some towns the arrangement of the furniture itself was a subtle form of matchmaking. A sofa angled just so could encourage 2 people to sit closer, while an armchair dragged into a far corner could exile an unwelcome suitor without a single word spoken. You lean back, maybe take a sip of tea if offered, and there it is, that moment of silence when you're supposed to fill the air. In the modern world, you could fumble for your phone and look busy. Here, you've got nothing but your wit, your manners, and maybe the odd anecdote about your trip to the county fair. The parlour, for all its cosy charm, could be merciless. Every cough, every awkward pause, every too loud laugh was noted and filed away in the mental ledgers of those present. And if the lady's father happened to be lurking just beyond the doorway, well, you might find your words suddenly sound less like Shakespeare and more like someone reading a weather report under duress. You shift slightly, trying not to creak the chair. Across from you, someone leans forward to adjust the lamp, and for a second, their eyes meet yours in the softened light. It's nothing, just a glance, but it lands with more weight than a paragraph of flowery prose. In the 19th century, that's how it started. Not with a grand declaration, but with a fleeting look across a room where time was marked in candle drips and the slow inhale of a fire in the grate. And as you sit there, you realize the parlour is both stage and audience, both comfort and test. Every detail, the warmth of the room, the clink of a teaspoon, the smell of polished wood, becomes part of the memory you'll carry long after you've stepped back into the night. You step outside the parlour, feeling the cooler night air on your cheeks, but your mind is still spinning from what just happened, or maybe didn't happen. inside. The next move isn't simply a matter of impulse. In 19th century America, it's a careful calculation, a slow chess game played in public view. And that's where the calling card comes in. The calling card ritual is deceptively simple. A small, rectangular piece of stiff paper, usually cream or ivory, with your name elegantly printed in black ink. But this isn't just paper, it's your entire social resume condensed into a few square inches. One wrong choice of font, and you might as well be announcing that you chew with your mouth open. You carry these cards in a slim leather case, always clean and free from bent corners. If you're a gentleman, you know exactly when and how to present one, either by hand to a servant or by leaving it on a silver tray in the entryway. The silver tray, by the way, is like the 19th century version of a Facebook friend request inbox. The household staff collects them, the lady of the house reviews them, and, here's the kicker, she decides whether your request gets accepted or quietly ignored. Historians still argue whether this system empowered women socially or simply gave them another ritual to manage under strict societal rules. The fringe detail you probably didn't expect. Some people folded corners of their calling cards to convey extra messages. A folded upper right corner could mean a personal visit instead of a formal one. A folded lower left might mean you were leaving town soon. It's like Victorian texting shorthand, except your LOL is now, "I intend to court you respectfully, please tell your mother." Picture it. You approach the house of someone you're hoping to know better. Your boots scuff on the gravel, and you smooth the front of your coat before knocking. A servant, often a young boy or girl, opens the door. You hand over your card, careful to hold it just so, and wait as it's placed on that gleaming tray. You might be allowed in if the family is at home, which means they're receiving visitors. Or you might be told politely that they are not at home. And here's the kicker. Not at home doesn't necessarily mean they aren't there. It could just mean they're not there for you. If your card is accepted, it might be placed in a special holder in the parlor, visible to other guests, a quiet sign that you're part of the social circle. If ignored, it could end up in a drawer, or even the fireplace. Social rejection by incineration. Efficient, if a little dramatic. The tension is exquisite. In our modern world, you can send a quick DM and get an answer within minutes. Here, days or weeks might pass before you know if your effort was worth it, and when the response comes, it's never a blunt yes or no. It's wrapped in layers of courtesy, the kind that force you to read between the lines until your brain feels like it's solving a mystery novel in real time. As you walk away from the doorstep, the cool breeze carrying the scent of wood smoke and freshly turned earth, you tuck your now lighter card case back into your coat pocket. You've taken the first formal step into courtship, but it's only the beginning. The real game will be played in parlors, on sidewalks, at church socials, and every move you make will be quietly observed by a dozen pairs of eyes. Somewhere behind one of those curtained windows, someone might already be holding your card, tracing the letters of your name with their thumb. Or maybe it's lying on the silver tray still, side by side with others, waiting to see if it will be moved to a place of honor, or quietly disappear. The card has been accepted, which means you're in, at least for now. Your next move isn't to burst through the door with flowers or poetry. No, in 19th century America, you make yourself visible in more subtle ways. One of the easiest? Sunday strolls. It's late morning, the church bells still humming faintly in the air, and the streets are alive with polished boots and rustling skirts. You take your place among the slow-moving river of neighbors and acquaintances, all drifting along the main road. This is no ordinary walk. It's a kind of performance. You keep your pace deliberate, not too quick, or you'll seem overeager, but not so slow that you risk being overtaken by an enthusiastic aunt with opinions about your personal life. The sidewalk etiquette here is practically its own science. A gentleman walks on the street side, shielding his companion from mud splashes if a carriage rattles by. Ladies keep their eyes lowered just enough to suggest modesty, but lift them at just the right moment for a fleeting smile. Historians still argue whether these walks were truly private moments in public or simply another social stage for others to appraise your compatibility. You might imagine this stroll as a quiet chance to talk, but you'd be wrong. Every turn of your head, every flick of your hand toward your hat brim is being watched, by shopkeepers leaning in their doorways, by children pretending to chase each other, and by that one neighbor who somehow knows everything about everyone. The whole town is the chaperone. The fringe tidbit here? In some towns, couples would circle the same few blocks multiple times, partly to extend their date without leaving the safety of public view. If you passed someone 3 times in the same afternoon, it was basically the 19th century equivalent of liking all their Instagram posts in one sitting. Your shoes make a satisfying tap on the wooden planks of the boardwalk. Beside you, the swish of skirts keeps rhythm. The air smells faintly of bread baking somewhere nearby, and a dog trots past, tail wagging like it's in on the secret. You speak in low tones, careful that your words are for your companion's ears alone, even though you know they're not. And yet there's a strange kind of intimacy in this public formality. You learn to communicate in glances, in the half-smile that appears when your companion pretends to point out a flower box, but is really saying something wordless. Your elbows might brush, by accident, of course, and it's enough to send a little shiver up your spine. As you turn the corner back toward the church, you feel a sense of completion, as if you've performed your role just right. No scandal, no misstep. Just the right blend of interest and propriety. Later, when you think back on it, you'll remember the sound of footsteps, the warmth of the sun, and the way one simple walk could feel like the beginning of something bigger. You've walked the length of the street, exchanged glances, maybe even a few cautious words. But the next time you meet, things will be different. Not freer, never that, but more contained. You're stepping into the realm of the chaperoned visit. It's late afternoon, the sunlight catching dust motes in the parlor, and you're already aware of the extra presence in the room. She sits in the corner with her knitting, spectacles perched on her nose, the rhythmic click of needles sounding almost like a metronome. This is the chaperone, usually a mother, older sister, or aunt, and she's the human embodiment of don't get too comfortable. You might think you can talk freely, but no. Every question you ask, every answer you give, is filtered through the knowledge that someone else is quietly absorbing every syllable. Historians still argue whether chaperones were genuinely protecting young women or just preserving the family's public image. Either way, their eyes could turn the temperature of the room down 10 degrees without a single word. The fringe tidbit here. In some families, the chaperone's role wasn't just to supervise, it was to subtly steer the conversation. A well-timed cough could derail an overly personal question. A sudden comment about the weather could cut off a potentially revealing anecdote. You'd be surprised how many Victorian romances were thwarted by someone bringing up rainfall statistics. You sit across from your companion, a respectable distance away, and the furniture placement ensures it stays that way. Your hands rest in your lap, your voice is just loud enough for both your intended listener and the unintended one in the corner to hear. Still, there's room for subtlety. A glance that lingers half a second longer than necessary. A shared laugh at something no one else would find amusing. The scrape of a chair leg as you lean forward, as if drawn by an invisible thread. The chaperone may notice, but she will never acknowledge it, at least not here. Sometimes the chaperone might excuse herself briefly, perhaps to fetch tea. Those minutes feel like stolen treasure. You speak a little more freely, the air warming instantly, but the awareness of her return keeps you from saying anything too bold. It's like playing a game where the clock is always ticking, and you never know exactly how much time is left. When the visit ends, you rise, bow slightly, and take your leave. Outside, you breathe in deeply, as though the walls themselves had been holding you in. You'll replay every moment in your mind later, every smile, every pause, every carefully chosen word, wondering if she heard the things you didn't actually say out loud. You've survived the parlor, the stroll, and the chaperone's silent watch. Now it's time for something more private, yet still entirely proper, the love letter. It's evening, your desk lit by a single oil lamp. The paper is thick, creamy, and slightly rough beneath your fingers. You dip your pen into ink, watching the tip glisten before touching it to the page. This isn't a note you dash off between errands. It's an event. Every loop of every letter matters. Your handwriting is as much a reflection of your character as the words themselves. A smudge could be interpreted as carelessness. A too flourished "we" might look like vanity. Love letters in the 19th century weren't just declarations, they were crafted performances. The right turn of phrase could make the reader's pulse quicken. The wrong one could have them reading it aloud at the next family gathering for comic relief. Historians still argue whether these letters were truly personal or just another stage for practicing the era's elaborate language of romance. You might open with polite formalities before slowly revealing your feelings, never too forward, never too vague. You avoid anything scandalous, of course, but you might include a small, coded reference, a mention of the book you discussed, the flower you saw on your walk, the exact shade of blue in the ribbon they wore last Sunday. The fringe tidbit? Some letters were written with invisible ink, made from lemon juice. The recipient could warm the paper near a flame to reveal a hidden message, often something far bolder than the visible lines allowed. Once the words are done, you fold the paper carefully, seal it with a dab of wax, and press a small brass stamp into it. The seal isn't just decorative, it's proof the letter hasn't been opened before it reaches its intended reader. Breaking that seal without permission is a social crime on par with stealing silverware. You imagine the moment they'll open it, the faint crack of the wax, the soft pull of the fold, the first scan of your handwriting. Maybe they'll read it in private, smiling at the corners of the page. Or maybe they'll share it with a confidant who will nod approvingly, or raise an eyebrow. And somewhere, as the night deepens and your ink dries, you sit back in your chair, wondering if your words will be read once, tucked away and forgotten, or folded and unfolded until the creases wear thin. The letter is sent, the seal unbroken until it reaches their hands. But what about when words aren't enough, or when speaking them aloud would be unthinkable in polite company? That's when you turn to the quiet ballet of gestures, the language of fans and gloves. It's late afternoon, and you're in a drawing room crowded with the faint scent of rosewater and the soft rustle of skirts. Across the room, she's holding an ornate folding fan, painted with delicate flowers, its sticks carved from bone or ivory. It looks like nothing more than a tool for cooling oneself, but to those in the know, it's practically a codebook. A slow fanning motion might mean she's interested. A rapid flutter could be impatience or irritation. Resting the fan against her left cheek might mean no, while the right cheek signals yes. Historians still argue whether these codes were universally understood or just a romantic myth that later generations projected onto the 19th century. Still, enough evidence lingers in etiquette manuals to suggest that many people believed in them, and belief in courtship often mattered as much as reality. And then there are gloves. Gloves were more than fashion, they were barriers and bridges. Removing one glove could suggest comfort and intimacy, or simply the need to pour tea. Dropping a glove, accidentally of course, was a classic move to spark conversation. The fringe tidbit here. Some women deliberately stitched tiny, loose threads into their glove hems so they'd unravel at the right moment, creating an excuse for a gentleman to assist. It's basically the 19th century version of Oops, I Dropped My Phone, but with better stitching. You watch from across the room as her fingers adjust the fan's angle. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's everything. Your eyes meet briefly, long enough for the smallest quirk of her lips before she turns away. Later, during a formal supper, the gloves come into play. She removes one slowly, tugging at each finger in a way that makes even the serving staff pause. It's not overt, it's not scandalous, but it is deliberate. In a world where touching hands is rare, bare skin becomes charged with meaning. You leave that evening replaying every movement in your mind. Did she really rest the fan on her right cheek? Was the glove removal meant for you, or simply the roast beef carving that took too long? In the delicate theatre of 19th century courtship, you often can't be sure, and maybe that's the point. The uncertainty keeps you returning, hoping to decode the next silent message. It's a Saturday evening, the sky already deepening into indigo, and the church hall is aglow with lamplight. Tonight isn't about sermons or scripture, it's about the social event everyone's been waiting for all week, the church social and pie supper. The wooden floor creaks under the shuffle of boots and skirts as neighbours greet one another, the air thick with the scent of coffee, baked apples and cinnamon. Long tables sag slightly under the weight of pies, each one a quiet statement. In some towns, the tradition is simple. Every young woman bakes a pie, places it in a decorative box or basket, and the young men bid on them. Win the pie, and you win the privilege of sharing it with the baker. It's matchmaking via pastry auction. You weave through the crowd, catching sight of familiar faces and feeling the subtle shifts in conversation as you approach. This is no casual mingling. It's a carefully choreographed opportunity for courtship under the wholesome umbrella of church fellowship. Historians still argue whether these socials were genuinely egalitarian community gatherings or just another way for the well-connected to consolidate their romantic and social influence. The fringe tidbit. Some women, more competitive than modest, were known to sneak a few extra spices or an exotic ingredient into their pies just to make them stand out. Nutmeg from the city, a dash of imported vanilla. These tiny luxuries could draw more bids and, perhaps, more desirable company. The auction begins, the preacher or local schoolmaster calling out each pie with a mix of humour and ceremony. You place a bid, careful not to seem too eager, and feel your pulse quicken when you win. The pie is warm, fragrant, its crust flaking under your fork as you sit across from its maker. The conversation starts with safe topics, the weather, the sermon, the crops. But the pie provides a shield. Between bites, you exchange glances that linger a little too long, laughter that rings just a bit too bright. Around you, other pairs are doing the same, some shy, some bold. The whole room hums with the gentle energy of possibility. And when the evening ends and the lamplight spills out into the cool night air, you walk away with more than a full stomach. You carry the memory of sweet crust and sweeter company, the taste lingering long after the last bite. The pie supper is behind you, but the next meeting is quieter, slower, and somehow more personal. Tonight you find yourself on the front porch, a place that, in the 19th century, straddles the line between private and public. It's just after sunset, the air still warm but cooling with each passing minute. The porch boards creak under your weight as you ease into a wooden rocking chair. Across from you, another chair moves in a gentle rhythm, the sound of its slow creak blending with the chirp of crickets in the hedges. Somewhere down the road, a wagon rattles by, its wheels grinding against the gravel. The front porch is a stage, but a subtler one than the church hall. Passers-by might see you, but they can't hear the low murmur of your voices. This is where conversations stretch out, unhurried, with long pauses that aren't awkward, but rather filled with the night's quiet music. Historians still argue whether the porch was a safe space for courtship or simply another layer of social observation. After all, a neighbour could stroll past at any moment. The fringe tidbit. In some rural communities, rocking chairs on the porch weren't just for comfort. They were practically part of the courtship ritual. Matching chairs placed side by side signalled a certain intimacy. If the chairs stayed farther apart, it meant things weren't that far along yet. You watch the lamplight from inside spill through the open door, catching dust motes in its glow. Between sentences you lean back, letting the chair's motion carry you like a slow tide. Every so often your eyes meet, and the shared silence feels like its own kind of conversation. The air smells faintly of honeysuckle drifting from the edge of the yard. A moth flits near the porch light, tapping against the glass. The evening moves at the speed of your rocking, each minute stretching comfortably. At some point, a hand rests on the armrest close enough that if either of you moved just slightly, fingers might touch. You don't? Not yet. In the 19th century, restraint is part of the dance. You let the moment hang there, like the pause between rocking forward and rocking back, both of you knowing it means more than words could. When you finally rise to leave, the boards groan under your step, and the night air greets you with a deeper chill. You walk away with the sound of that slow creak in your ears, a rhythm you'll carry until the next time the chairs sway together in the soft dark. The porch visits are warm and slow, but there comes a night when you trade the hush of rocking chairs for the hum of strings and the sweep of skirts, a formal dance, perhaps a cotillion, or a winter waltz in the largest hall the town can muster. It's early evening and the ballroom glows with the light of dozens of oil lamps and candles, their reflections dancing in the tall windows. The polished wood floor gleams like still water, waiting for the first steps to ripple across it. A small orchestra tunes in the corner, violins, a flute, maybe a piano brought in from the local church, and their warm-up notes weave through the low chatter of guests. The air is heavy with perfume, hair pomade, and the faint tang of brass from the musicians' instruments. If you've been hoping for a chance to spend more than a few guarded minutes together, this is it, but only if you follow the rules. Dances are prearranged affairs, and it's not just a matter of walking up and asking. Often a gentleman requests a place on a lady's dance card, a small booklet tied with ribbon where she lists her partners for each set. To be missing from her card entirely, that's social purgatory. Historians still argue whether these formal dances were true opportunities for romance or carefully orchestrated exercises in reinforcing social hierarchies. After all, who you danced with and how many times was noticed and remembered. The fringe tidbit? At some gatherings, a gentleman was allowed only 2 dances with the same partner in a single evening. Any more, and whispers would start, sometimes approvingly, sometimes not. The music begins and you take her hand, gloved and warm, leading her onto the floor. The waltz isn't just steps, it's a negotiation of distance and timing. The first turn sweeps you past the chaperones stationed along the wall like sentinels, their eyes tracking every couple. The second turn brings you nearer to the open windows, where the night air brushes your cheek. As you dance, you catch fragments of conversation from nearby couples, mention of the harvest, gossip about a recent engagement, speculation about who will leave the evening together. But in your small circle of movement, the noise fades. The music becomes a current, carrying you through each step until you're unsure where the floor ends and you begin. When the final note hangs in the air, you bow slightly, she curtsies, and you escort her back to her seat. The formality is intact, the propriety unbroken, but beneath it all, there's a current neither of you can deny, even if the rest of the room thinks they're the only ones who see it. You linger near the pianoforte as if the instrument has its own gravity, polished wood catching the candlelight like a small lake at dusk. The lid is propped, the ivory keys a tidy row of teeth waiting to bite into melody. Someone, perhaps the same someone whose dance card you prayed to find your name on, settles on the bench and pulls a stack of dog-eared sheet music closer. The first chord blooms in the room, warm and a little shy, and you feel it land exactly where your pulse has been hovering all evening. Music in a 19th century parlour isn't background, it's a conversation that happens to be sung. Households treat the piano like a hearth that also happens to play Home, Sweet Home. The mainstream fact here is simple and immense. By the late 1800s, the upright piano becomes a middle-class essential in America, and the sheet music industry booms with it. Tens of thousands of songs sold to families who gather after supper to turn notes into community. If the family doesn't own a piano, a melodeon, pump organ, or even a sturdy fiddle might take the lead. But the principle is the same. Sound makes the walls softer and the silence is safer. You stand at a comfortable distance. The chaperone's knitting needles click a steady tempo in the corner, allegro tonight, and you study the way her shoulders relax as she plays. It begins with a sentimental ballad, the kind Stephen Foster could write in his sleep, and you can't help noticing how the lyrics about light brown hair suddenly feel uncomfortably specific. You keep your expression neutral, which is hard when a song is low-key subtweeting you in 1859. The room responds in layers. A cousin hums the tune, an uncle pretends not to enjoy it while tapping his shoe, and the younger siblings gather like moths to a lantern, eyes glassy with the spell of melody. You drift closer, just enough to turn pages when she nods, an honor that feels like being knighted with paper. Your fingers brush the edge of the sheet as you flip at the double bar, and you swear the air itself pauses for a fraction, then exhales. Another? Someone suggests. Of course another. Music is the one activity that lets a courtship happen in public while still feeling private. You can direct a line in a song outward to the whole room and still let it find one person's ears like a homing pigeon. You're careful, though. Choose a tune too obviously romantic and the aunt will raise an eyebrow so sharp it could cut through a metronome. Like joke one, somewhere a metronome feels a sudden chill. Historians still argue whether parlor music truly gave women new creative influence in the home, turning the bench into a small throne, or whether it mainly reinforced the ideal of the accomplished daughter, whose arts were lovely precisely because they stayed within the walls. What no one disputes is how music braided families and neighbors together, giving the evening a spine. Hymn at the start, folk tune for laughter, ballad for the feeling you don't name. A fringe tidbit floats your way from the far side of the room. Some couples penciled tiny code marks in their shared sheet music, an extra staccato dot here, a curtailed rest there, so that on the night they played together, the altered rhythm spelled out initials in Morse timing. Anyone else would hear a slightly jaunty Aurelia. You heard unmistakably a quiet A-L. It's the musical cousin of folding the corner of a calling card, except this time the proof sings back. Tonight's program expands, a shape note hymn taught at a local singing school, a nimble reel someone learned at a barn dance, and then a waltz played not for feet but for hearts. You're invited, softly, to sing harmony, and you do, careful to aim your voice like lamplight, wide enough for the room, focused enough to land near the bench. Your harmony fits beside the melody like two chairs on a front porch, close enough to touch, restrained enough not to. When the song ends, there is that hush, the one that means the music has done its work. And then the shuffle of compliments, lovely touch, a fine ear, such feeling. You add yours sparingly, too much praise, sounds like an encore request for the whole person. Still you notice her glance toward the gloves resting by the lamp, the same gloves that last week she removed finger by careful finger. She doesn't put them on yet. That's permission enough to stay. A new piece appears on the rack. It isn't a popular song, it's a nocturne marked and remarked in pencil. The top corner of the page is creased, the kind of fold you once saw on a calling card left on a silver tray. She plays without warning, and the first measures are gentle as breath on glass. You realize in a small shock that you've heard this once before, faintly, through an open window as you passed the house on a windy evening. The memory returns with the scent of coal smoke and lilac, a thread tying tonight to some earlier you who didn't yet know where the thread led. You turn another page. On the margin, a pressed violet lies flattened like a kept secret. You remember the church social, the cinnamon and chatter, the disguised matchmaking in pastry form, and you think of how music slices through all those layers of ceremony with one clean note. If pie was the bribe, the piano is the confession. Like joke 2, somewhere a pie feels underdressed without a treble clef. The aunt coughs, not the meteorological kind from section 4 that can end a conversation, but the do mind the hour kind. Candles have shortened into stubborn puddles, and the clock insists it has been patient. You feel that familiar 19th century tug, propriety winding the evening down like a music box. Which reminds you, another quirky thread, how popular mechanical music boxes are becoming, tiny brass combs plucking steel teeth to hum little arias from inside brooches and parlour curios. Some are set in lockets. A lover might carry a melody against the pulse of their wrist, a private concert no chaperone can interrupt. A final request tiptoes into the room. A duet. She shifts on the bench. You take the place beside her, leaving the respectable inch of air between your shoulders. 4 hands over one keyboard is choreography with consequences, a public puzzle of proximity. You mind your crossings as if the keys were narrow bridges and each fingertip a polite traveller. There is a moment, inevitable, when your little finger grazes hers at middle C. Nothing dramatic, nothing that the aunt could cite in a moral footnote, just the barest proof that you share the same instrument, the same staff, for a few careful minutes. You're aware, intensely, of small things. The faint scratch of graphite, where someone earlier corrected a rhythm. The faint smell of beeswax from the keys, cousin to the polish you noted in that first parlour. The way the waltz you danced 2 sections ago finds a cousin in the inner voices of this duet. A callback arrives of its own accord. The fan's secrets, the glove's signals, earlier alphabets that music now translates into a language both of you finally speak without moving your lips. Light joke 3. Take that, telegraph. Tonight, the wires are made of catgut and stubborn emotion. When the last chord settles, the room exhales in small, approving sounds. You stand, more reluctant than the etiquette books recommend, and offer a half bow. She returns a smile shaped like gratitude, with a ribbon of mischief through it. Somewhere near the door, a calling card tray catches one more card from a later arrival. But your thoughts are elsewhere, on the line in the nocturne that felt like a question, and the cadence that felt like an answer, and the sense that both of you heard the same things even if neither of you said them aloud. You help close the lid. The candles are now buttons of light, ready to be pinched out. As you step into the hall, the night beyond the door has that soft, woolen quality that keeps footsteps quiet and secrets quieter. You carry a tune in your chest where the heart usually speaks, and you don't need a letter or a folded corner or even a bouquet of coded violets to know that something has been said and understood. The parlour falls behind you, but the melody follows, pacing you like a friend who knows the way home. The music lingers in your mind for days, but when the next opportunity comes, it's not in a candlelit parlour or a polished ballroom. It's under an open sky, quilts spread wide on the grass, and the smell of clover rising with the summer air. Picnics in the 19th century aren't the casual grab-a-basket-and-go affairs you might imagine. They're orchestrated with as much care as a formal supper, except the table is a meadow and the roof is a blue vault of sky. Families, neighbours, and carefully invited guests gather in a clearing, perhaps under a sprawling oak or beside a slow-moving creek. Ladies bring baskets lined with embroidered cloths. Gentlemen carry crates of lemonade bottles clinking like a chorus line. You arrive to find the ground dotted with quilts in a patchwork of colours, each one its own island. Choosing where to sit is a social decision as deliberate as who you bid for at a pie supper. Settle beside someone's Aunt Mildred, and you'll spend the afternoon discussing the merits of her blackberry preserves. Spread your quilt near the person who played that nocturne, and you might spend the day with sunlight pooling between you like liquid gold. The mainstream historical fact? By the mid-1800s, picnics had become fixtures of community life, often tied to holidays, church anniversaries, or political rallies. They were spaces where courtship could breathe, away from chaperoned parlours, but still in public view. Everyone saw who shared strawberries with whom, who offered the last slice of pie, who walked off, just to look at the wildflowers. The fringe tidbit is sweeter. In some places, courting couples would hide small notes or tokens under a corner of the picnic cloth, messages to be discovered when the baskets were packed away. A sprig of lavender, a folded scrap of music, even a button from a glove could say more than a paragraph in the town paper. You settle onto a quilt, the grass warm beneath the fabric. Bees drift lazily from clover to clover, and somewhere a child's laughter carries over the sound of a hymn sung half-heartedly by a group near the lemonade stand. A plate is passed your way, fried chicken, still warm, and you share it with your companion, your fingers brushing for the briefest moment as you pass a drumstick. The contact is innocent to anyone watching, but you both know how deliberate it feels. After the meal, someone suggests a walk to the creek. A few others tag along, enough to keep it proper, but not enough to break the spell of near privacy. You pause at the water's edge, watching sunlight fracture on the ripples. Words aren't necessary. The moment is stitched together from the sound of rushing water, the whisper of leaves overhead, and the memory of music still playing somewhere in the back of your mind. Later, as the day begins to fade, the quilts are folded, baskets emptied, and voices call across the field for rides home. You shake crumbs from the blanket, and there, tucked in the fold, is a single wildflower, its stem wrapped in a narrow ribbon the exact shade of the gloves you once saw resting by a lamplight. You pocket it without a word. The warm countryside still clings to your skin from the picnic, but tonight the setting is different, closer, cozier, and filled with the faint clink of glass dishes. You find yourself in an ice cream parlour, a rare delight in the mid to late 19th century, where frozen sweetness is as much a novelty as a gramophone. The shop is narrow but bright, gas lamps reflecting in tall mirrors behind the counter. Marble-topped tables gleam under the light, each surrounded by delicate wire chairs that look like they were designed more for appearances than comfort. The air smells of vanilla and caramelized sugar, underscored by the faint medicinal tang of the ice block kept in the insulated chest behind the counter. Ice cream parlours in the 1800s aren't yet the everyday indulgence they'll become in the 20th century. They're still something special, something you plan for. The mainstream fact here, commercial ice cream in America began to spread rapidly after the invention of hand-cranked freezers in the 1840s, making frozen desserts available beyond the wealthiest homes. By the post-Civil War period, shops like this one began popping up in towns lucky enough to have ice delivery. You take a seat across from your companion, the small round table forcing your knees closer than any parlour chair would dare. A waiter in a white apron sets down 2 tall glasses, each crowned with a swirl of whipped cream and topped with a cherry. The first spoonful is so cold it stings behind your eyes, and you both laugh at your involuntary wince. The fringe tidbit? Sharing a dish, 2 spoons in one bowl, was considered forward enough to raise eyebrows if done in public. In some cities, etiquette guides warned against mutual tasting in ice cream parlours, suggesting it was a step toward immoderate familiarity, which naturally made it even more tempting. Outside, the summer evening hums with the sounds of carriages and the occasional shout from a street vendor. Inside, the walls seem to close in just enough to make your voices drop. You talk about little things, a book you've both read, the latest gossip from the church social, the funny way Mrs. Talbot's hat feathers nearly caught fire near a lamp last week. But beneath the light talk, there's a steady undercurrent, like the syrup at the bottom of the glass, richer for having waited. A drip slides down the side of your glass, and without thinking, you catch it with your finger. She notices a half-smile playing at her lips before she looks away, as if that simple motion was somehow too revealing. The ice cream melts slowly, pooling into sweet, cool cream at the bottom. You take your time, drawing out the moment until the spoons clink against glass, and there's nothing left but a faint trace of cherry juice. When you step outside, the night air feels warmer than when you went in, and you can't tell if it's the lingering sugar or something else entirely. You walk her home, each step punctuated by the memory of cold cream, warm laughter, and the fleeting closeness of a small round table in a bright little shop. The evening has the kind of hush that makes hoofbeats sound like a heartbeat, steady and certain. You stand beside the hitching rail while the hostler tightens the last strap, and the mare flicks an ear as if to say, "Yes, yes, you two can talk, so long as I get oats later." The lantern swings, throwing a buttery oval of light over the buggy step. You offer a careful hand, she places a gloved finger's-light trust in yours, and in a moment you're both settled, lap-robe, across your knees like a shared secret. The first yards are always a little clumsy. The wheel bumps a rut, the mare tests your attention, and you remember, too late, that you meant to practice a jauntier up. You manage something between a whisper and a hiccup. She smiles into her bonnet. The mare remains unimpressed. The road leaves town quickly, houses thinning into hedgerows, the lamps shrinking behind you like candles pinched between forefinger and thumb. The buggy's leaf springs creak a low lullaby, and the air smells like fields cooling after a day of sun. You breathe easier. The town can't hear you now, and the chaperone is a horse with opinions. Light joke 1, arguably the most judgmental aunt yet. 0 words, infinite side-eye. You settle into the rhythm. Left wheel lifts, right wheel answers, leather traces hum, a metal ring taps softly against the shaft. Words become optional. It's a relief after parlours and pews, after dance cards and piano benches that required choreography just to share a glance. Out here, the rules bend without breaking. You can lean closer to be heard over the steady clop, and the dark obliges by blurring anything that might look like a scandal to anyone not actually in the buggy. Historians still argue whether carriage rides gave young people liberating privacy or simply relocated surveillance, routes timed, landmarks known, windows along the road quietly counting how long you were gone. The mainstream fact fits the moment. By the mid to late 19th century, light buggies and road wagons, sulkies, phaetons and later surreys are everywhere in America, cheap enough that even modest families keep one for Sunday rides and courting calls. In snow country, the buggy trades wheels for runners, and the law in some New England towns requires sleigh bells, so you don't surprise another rig rounding a bend. Romancy meet regulation. Jingling is not optional. She tucks the lap robe closer, the fringe whispering across your knuckles. You pretend not to notice and fail spectacularly. The road opens to a low meadow where crickets go at their midnight symphony like they're paid by the note. Your voices drop to match the dark. You trade the kind of half-finished thoughts you'd never risk under a parlour lamp, a page you loved in last week's borrowed novel, a song that stuck after the duet, the scandal of Mrs. Talbot's hat feathers that nearly achieved liftoff near a gas sconce. You hear her laugh and feel the buggy, absurdly, ride smoother for it. The fringe tidbit clinks under the robe like a warmed brick. Many couples carried foot warmers, little tin boxes of live coals or hefty stones heated by the hearth, then wrapped in flannel, so toes didn't turn tragic in the night air. A clever suitor might carve his initials into the wooden handle of the warmer, hidden until a certain tilt of light made confession out of utility. And yes, in sleigh season, more than a few mischief-prone hearts felt over the bells to mute them along a quiet stretch, romance turning public safety into pianissimo. Light joke 2, somewhere a town constable senses a disturbance in the jingle. You point toward the ridge where the moon lifts itself over a line of poplars, all looped with a pale halo. The mare slows of her own accord, hooves choosing the soft shoulder. You talk about almost nothing, fence rails needing repair, a neighbour's new beehives, the absurd price of imported nutmeg that turned a simple pie supper into a bidding war. The night collects your words, stacks them neatly, and hands back only the ones you meant. Now and then you risk a callback, the way a story loops its thread through earlier fabric. You mention the pressed violet you noticed in the margin of that nocturne, and she pretends not to know what you mean until, carelessly, carefully, she says she's partial to flowers that keep their colour, even when flattened by time. You answer by tapping the reins lightly, as if conversation with a horse were the natural next step. Light joke 3, the mare, to her credit, abstains from comment on floriculture as relationship metaphor. The moon climbs higher, and with it your willingness to say the quiet parts. You admit you sometimes pass the house just to catch a bar or two through an open window, music drifting the way coal smoke and lilac did the first night you stood trembling in the doorway. She confesses she once folded a calling card corner that wasn't meant to be folded, signal misfired, message too bold, a tiny scandal between a tray and a fireplace. You don't rush to fill the silence after. It feels like the long rocker pause on a moonlit porch, a breath that says more than a paragraph could. You reach a wooden bridge, boards ringing under wheel and hoof, water slipping black between the slats. Here, voices echo and you both instinctively go quiet. The mare drinks from the stream while you study the lantern's reflection and try not to notice how the light turns her profile into soft geometry. Bonnet brim, cheek, the curve of a lip that is not yours to write about in a letter yet. You fish in your pocket, produce the hard candy you meant to offer back in town and forgot. She laughs, accepts, and cracks it gently between her teeth. For the next few minutes, you trade the peppermint back and forth like a treaty that keeps finding new signatures. On the far side of the bridge, the road climbs. In the trees, a whip-poor-will calls its name until the name sounds like an opinion. You talk about the future without naming it, the way apple trees promise a fall you can't see yet. A practical note slips in, the sort of ledger-quiet detail that carries weight in the 19th century. Savings toward a piece of land, an apprenticeship nearly complete, a sister moving west come spring. These aren't declarations, they're coordinates, and the buggy seems to understand you're charting more than a pleasant loop. The debate returns like the shadow of a cloud. Historians still argue whether this rolling privacy loosened the knot of parental oversight or simply taught young people to thread their feelings through narrower eyelets. A lap robe drawn a fraction closer, a hand warmed above coals, then returned to its glove, the near touch at middle C, now translated to reins and breath. You don't solve the argument, you're busy living its evidence. By the time the town pricks the horizon with a few stubborn lamps, the mare has shortened her stride, the universal sign for home soon, snacks please. You pass the mill, quiet now except for the residual smell of sawdust and river. The streets remember your wheels. The boards of the familiar bridge reply with the same tuned knocks as before, like a friend knocking back through a door. When you draw up in front of the gate, the world remembers its manners. You set the brake, hop down, and turn to offer your hand. She takes it, gloved again. And that's that. The magic of the road folded neatly into the square of a town lot. You walk her to the porch, where the rocker stands, as if it never moved. The door is a dark rectangle. Behind it, those knitting needles could be anywhere. You bow, she inclines her head, and 1,000 unspoken lines hang like stars, existing whether anyone names them or not. You lead the mare to the stable, unbuckle the tack with a practiced economy that feels older than your bones. Oats rattle into the bin. The lantern throws a circle of light that doesn't bother with the corners. You rest a palm on the mare's warm neck and say what you can't say to anyone else. Thank you, and also please forget everything. The horse chews equably, which is either absolution or blackmail. You'll know at the next pie supper when she stares pointedly at the nutmeg. Walking home, you tuck the laprobe's faint scent of soap and night into your coat like a folded letter. The road has given you what parlours and piano tops and ice cream tables could not. A moving room large enough to hold an admission, small enough to hear it. Tomorrow there will be sidewalks and calling trays and chaperones who cough when rain isn't even scheduled. But tonight you had a bridge that sang, bells that maybe didn't, and a mare who kept time like a metronome that finally chose the right tempo. You can still feel the gentle sway of the buggy even after you've been home for hours. But in a town like this, rides, walks and porch visits are never just between two people. By morning, the real ride begins, a swift, invisible current of small-town gossip. It starts innocently enough. Mrs. Pemberton, the postmaster's wife, happens to see you helping her into the buggy. By the time she's finished sorting the morning mail, the story has been told twice, each time with an extra detail that may or may not have actually happened. You wave to Mr. Dalton on the street, and you can feel him filing away a mental note to mention to his wife that you seemed cheerful this morning. In a place where everyone knows everyone's cousin's middle name, this counts as significant intelligence. The mainstream historical fact is unavoidable. In 19th century rural America, gossip wasn't just idle chatter, it was the social glue and the unofficial news service. Without radio or instant messaging, word of mouth carried everything from crop yields to courtship rumors. Historians still argue whether gossip acted as a benign community binder or as a form of soft surveillance that kept everyone tightly inside the bounds of acceptable behavior. The fringe tidbit. Some families kept what were essentially gossip diaries, little ledgers where daily social observations were written down alongside weather notes and household expenses. Decades later, these became treasured and sometimes mortifying records for descendants. You can feel the network working in real time. At the bakery, Mrs. Grover asks casually if you'll be going out riding again this weekend, as if she's just curious about the weather. At the general store, young Thomas tries, poorly, to hide a grin when he weighs your flour. Even the preacher's wife gives you a look that suggests she's praying for you, though whether it's for your eternal soul or your romantic prospects is unclear. Your companion isn't immune either. She'll hear her own set of carefully worded comments. Saw you enjoying the evening air, or that's a fine bonnet, someone must have noticed. Each phrase is both a compliment and a probe. You both learn quickly that every smile, every pause, and certainly every repeated sighting together becomes fuel for the slow-burning fire of public interest. It's a delicate dance. You can't be too public too soon. That would invite assumption. But being too cautious risks letting the story fizzle out before its time. So you let the current carry you a little, allowing a carefully placed sighting here, a well-timed, accidental meeting there. By the end of the week, the whole town knows you've been seen together. No one has said the word courting outright, but it's hanging in the air like the smell of fresh bread, undeniable and, to some, irresistible. When the talk quiets down, at least to a low simmer, you decide it's time for a gesture that can't be mistaken for chance. A gift. In the 19th century, giving something small but thoughtful is a signal as deliberate as placing your name in the first spot on a dance card. It's late morning when you step into the milliner's shop, the bell above the door chiming like a private announcement. The air smells faintly of starch and lavender, with a sharp undertone of iron from the sewing tools. Around you, shelves hold ribbons in every shade, lace trimmed so fine it looks like frost, and gloves laid out in tidy pairs. The mainstream fact is simple but important. Gift-giving in the 1800s was governed by layers of etiquette. A token between courting partners had to be appropriate in cost, material, and timing. Too expensive, and it might imply obligation. Too personal, and it might be deemed improper, especially if given before an engagement. Historians still argue whether such rules were a safeguard against misunderstandings or a way to keep romance fenced in by social class and custom. You run your fingers along a row of ribbon spools, remembering the colour of her bonnet the night of the church social. A soft sky blue catches your eye, not too bold, not too pale, and you ask the shopkeeper to cut a length just long enough for a bow at the crown. The fringe tidbit here? Some suitors in the 19th century secretly scented their gifts, pressing ribbons or handkerchiefs against a sprig of lavender or rosemary so the fragrance would release when handled. It's a small, invisible signature. The package is wrapped simply brown paper and string, and you tuck it into your coat pocket. Later, on a quiet afternoon, you find a moment to present it. There's no elaborate speech, just a thought this might suit your bonnet, and a quick, almost awkward handoff. She unknots the string with care, the ribbon sliding into her hands like water. She runs her thumb along its edge, smiling in that restrained way people do when they know others might be watching. She thanks you, voice light, but you catch the subtle glance downward as she folds it carefully, tucking it away as if it already belongs to her. By evening, the ribbon is threaded through her bonnet. It might be coincidence, of course. That's the beauty of such a gift. It allows both of you to say everything without ever speaking it aloud. The ribbon now lives on her bonnet, catching sunlight whenever you happen to pass her in the street. But not all courtship can be carried out face to face. Sometimes the miles stretch too far, the weather turns too rough, or family obligations keep you apart for weeks. That's when the conversation turns to dots and dashes, the clipped electric language of the telegraph. The telegraph office is a narrow, echoing room with bare wood floors and a tall counter polished smooth by years of elbows. A brass key clicks steadily in the operator's hand. Each tap sending a pulse along wires that string their way across fields, rivers, and mountain passes. The air smells faintly of oil from the machinery and dust from the envelopes stacked in neat piles. The mainstream fact is this: by the 1870s, the telegraph had become the fastest way to send personal messages across distance, but every word cost money. That made romantic correspondence both a test of thrift and of skill. You had to compress your heart into as few words as possible without sounding abrupt. Historians still argue whether this economy sharpened the sincerity of courtship or stripped it of the gentle nuance found in letters. You take the stubby pencil from the counter and write on the thin slip of paper, counting as you go. Thinking of you, stop trust, you are well, stop awaiting, Sunday, stop. It feels almost clinical until you imagine her reading it, seeing your name at the bottom, her eyes lingering on awaiting. The fringe tidbit? Some couples develop private codes to slip into their telegrams, harmless enough to pass the operator's eyes but loaded with meaning. A mention of the river might mean a secret meeting place. 3 baskets could be a reminder of an anniversary. When she receives your message, it will be read aloud by the local operator. Privacy in the telegraph age is more of a polite fiction than a guarantee, and yet that doesn't diminish the quickening in her chest when she hears your name. Your words. Days later, her reply arrives. Looking forward. Stop hope for clear skies. Stop bring ribbon. Stop. You read it twice, then fold it into your pocket like a talisman. Even pared down to essentials, it carries enough warmth to bridge the miles until you meet again. The lamps are trimmed low, and the parlour feels like a velvet-lined box that someone has just opened. Soft voices, bright eyes, and the faint clink of china drifting through the lid. Tonight isn't about waltzes or promenades. Tonight, you play. Which is to say, you flirt, but with rules and props, as if romance came with an instruction manual and a deck of cards. Someone proposes charades, and a little thrill runs through the room. Charades is perfect for a courtship era that requires you to say everything without saying anything. You stand up, swallow your nerves, and mime a title. First word, 2 syllables, while the room leans forward. Your hands draw shapes in the air, ridiculous and desperate, and the laughter is warm, permissive. When she guesses correctly, your eyes meet for an extra beat, a prize better than any ribbon. The aunt's knitting needles pause, then resume, which is basically a standing ovation in that dialect. The mainstream historical fact. By the mid-19th century, parlour games like charades, forfeits, and blind man's buff were staples of American middle-class evenings, exported and adapted from earlier British fashions. Instruction books for drawing-room amusements sold well, promising wholesome fun that also conveniently arranged bodies in proximity without collapsing propriety. It's entertainment with training wheels, and those wheels squeak flirtation. Forfeits, of course, is where the real mischief hides. Everyone tosses a small token into a hat, a ribbon tip, a coin, a glove button, and later must redeem it by performing a playful penalty. The forfeits are never written down, which is how the parlour pretends they're innocent. Bow to the prettiest person in the room, tell a secret, steal a handkerchief without being seen. You drop a plain brass cuff button into the hat and pretend it means nothing. When your turn comes, the penalty is drawn in a voice that sounds suspiciously amused. Exchange seats with the person you admire most without speaking. It's a trick of geometry now, the furniture complicit, and somehow you end up exactly where you hoped, close enough to see the blue of that bonnet ribbon, the one you chose, catch a bit of lamplight. Historians still argue whether these games actually gave young women and men a dose of freedom, micro-rebellions wrapped in etiquette, or whether the daring was so carefully gated that it mostly trained everyone to want less than they felt. Maybe it's both. Either way, you find yourself perfectly content to let a rule book hand you the chance you wouldn't dare take outright. A fringe tidbit glows at the edge of the evening, literally. At Christmas time, some families play Snapdragon, Raisins scattered in a shallow dish of brandy, set alight so the blue flames quiver like something alive. The goal is to pluck a raisin from the fire and pop it in your mouth without redecorating your face with singe marks. It is half game, half insurance claim, and wholly irresistible to braver hearts. Courting couples custom insists, steal raisins for each other, proof of daring, devotion, and decent reflexes. Light joke 1, the raisins are fine, it's your eyebrows filing a complaint with management. Tonight, you avoid open flame and choose consequences, another parlour favourite. Slips of paper pass around the circle. One person writes a name, another a meeting place, a third a line of dialogue, a fourth the outcome. The papers get folded between lines so no one sees the full story until the end. When read aloud, the results are nonsense of the most diagnostic kind. Mr. Whittaker met Miss L under the mill bridge, said, "Beware of nutmeg," and then they both ate pie in silence. The room collapses in laughter. You feel the private echo. Bridges and nutmeg, you've had your share of both. Someone suggests tableau vivant. Living pictures, chairs drag softly, shawls become costumes, a spare laurel wreath, why does every parlour have one, perches on a cousin's head. Scenes from mythology or popular novels are arranged in a frozen pose while the rest of the room admires. You play your part, a silent figure holding a book or a distant traveller staring heroically into an imagined horizon while the person beside you holds the other end of the story. It's perfectly innocent, perfectly theatrical, and perfectly situated to let two hands share the same armrest for a long, steady minute. You keep noticing the aunt's tempo in the corner. Knit, knit, pause, knit, knit, pause. It's become the metronome of section 10 back when the nocturne stitched feelings to the air. Now the rhythm blesses a different performance. You catch the glint of a familiar cuff button as it returns from the hat, and for a strange, small second, you feel how these evenings assemble a history you could read without words. A tray of calling cards, a ribbon, a duet, a bridge's hollow knocks, a lap robe's fringe, and now a silly paper crown from a tableau that feels more regal than your coat ever will. Blind man's buff appears like a dare with a handkerchief. You submit to the blindfold because you are brave or naive, or because you're letting chance do its best work. The room murmurs. Floorboards whisper. Someone spins you gently 3 times. Then the hunt begins. Hands outstretched, you move through space, turned into scent and sound. Beeswax polish, section 1's faithful ghost. Trace of lavender, the stifled giggle that belongs to the person who plays waltzes like confessions. You stumble toward it and catch a shoulder that feels known even through fabric and careful distance. The room whoops, scandalized but pleased. You lift the blindfold and pretend surprise. The game is a theatre, and everyone agrees to applaud the obvious. Light joke 2. The chaperone registers mildly entertained, which in this house is the moral equivalent of fireworks. In a lull, the piano bench opens, not for a concert, but for a quiet demonstration of authors. The card game sweeping parlours now with little portraits of Longfellow, Hawthorne, Irving, and company. You trade sets like book club members disguised as gamblers. When she asks if you have Evangeline, you hand it over, and with it, a glance that says you remember the pressed violet in the nocturne's margin. The room is busy giggling over someone's unfortunate tableau posture. No one notices the library you just built between your fingers. A new penalty in forfeits. Tell a truth about your first impression of someone here. You choose the safe path with the wobble of a tightrope. I thought Miss L could train a metronome to keep better time. Laughter, a proper blush, and under it, exactly the message you meant. I saw you at the piano long before I knew I was listening. The aunt clears her throat, not the rainfall kind, not the bedtime kind, but the round 2 is almost tomorrow kind. Candles are shorter, the coals sigh in the grate. The room begins the gentle ritual of winding down, tokens gathered, chairs returned to their original angles, the social clock set back to its neutral face. You help stack the charade cards into their box, and your fingers touch hers for an instant that pretends to be accidental. Light joke 3, fate, helpfully disguised, as, oops, the lid. Before you go, one more game, the quietest of the evening. A book is opened at random, and someone reads the first sentence their finger finds like a miniature oracle. The line is unremarkable, something about the road home and the hour late. But it lands with the soft authority of a truth you've already learned by lantern, by sleigh bells maybe muted, by buggy wheel on a memorized bridge. You let the silence hold it, the way a rocker holds the middle of its arc. On the hall table, the calling card tray shows a neat new fan of names, proof that the town keeps inhaling and exhaling its little dramas. You leave yours at the edge, not bold, not buried. Then step into the night where the air tastes of half-slept hours. The street is quiet enough to hear your own thoughts tidy themselves. You walk home with the remembered heat of a raisin you didn't actually rescue from flame, the imagined soot of snapdragon on your fingertips, and the knowledge that games tonight allowed what letters and laps of a churchyard could not. Sanctioned near misses, rehearsals of touch, and a shared laugh sturdy enough to carry a waltz. Behind you the parlour settles, gloves reclaimed, fans folded, knitting tucked away. Somewhere a metronome is finally at peace, having found the tempo of a heart that learned, charades, can tell the truth with its hands, and that forfeits is just a parlour word for the small things we're willing to risk in order to keep playing. The air has shifted since that last evening of parlour games. Summer is loosening its hold, and with it the scents change, from lilacs and fresh-cut grass to something sharper, wood smoke curling from chimneys, apples sweetening in barrels, damp leaves pressed into the earth. Courtship in the 19th century has its own calendar, and you can feel it turn. Seasons aren't just background here. They dictate where and how you meet, what you wear, even the tone of your conversations. The mainstream historical fact is straightforward. In rural and small-town America, courtship followed seasonal rhythms shaped by farming schedules, church events, and weather. Planting and harvest left little time for lingering walks. Winter, paradoxically, often offered more privacy, longer evenings, fewer outdoor eyes, and the muffling hush of snow. Historians still argue whether winter romances were more intense because of enforced indoor proximity, or whether it was just the extra lamplight making faces seem closer. You notice the differences right away. The porch chairs are pulled back from the rail now, safe from early frosts. Walks after church are shorter, the air crisp enough to make breath visible in soft white puffs. Instead of lemonade at a table in an ice cream shop, you cradle a mug of mulled cider, its steam curling into your nose, along with cinnamon and clove. The fringe tidbit? Some couples in New England and the Midwest had a courtship ritual called bundling during the cold months, where a suitor might be invited to spend the night in the young woman's home, the two of them fully clothed and sometimes separated by a sewn sack or a wooden board in the bed. The idea was to allow intimacy of conversation without impropriety, though the system's success, as you might guess, depended heavily on willpower and supervision. In autumn, gifts changed too. A ribbon might be replaced by a knit scarf, its stitches slightly uneven where fingers hesitated over a particular row. A pressed summer flower might be joined by a bright red leaf tucked into a letter. Music in the parlour turns slower, deeper, the waltzes giving way to hymns and ballads that seem to suit the lower sun. On a clear afternoon, you join a group gathering apples in the orchard. Ladders lean against trees heavy with fruit, and the air is filled with the soft thud of apples hitting the grass. It's all very proper, work mixed with chatter, but there's still room for quiet moments, passing a basket hand to hand, reaching for the same branch, laughing when a stubborn apple refuses to drop. Later, the season will move again, toward winter's sleigh rides, toward letters written with cold, stiffened fingers. But for now, the courtship feels like the year itself, balanced on the edge of change, holding on to the warmth while you can. The first bite of winter sharpens the air, and with it comes the annual shift in how people present themselves. In the 19th century, fashion isn't just vanity, it's an announcement. A person can read your social standing, your occupation, even your marital status, in the cut of your coat or the tilt of your bonnet. And when romance is in the air, first impressions become an art form. You step into the general store one chilly morning, stomping the frost from your boots. She's already there, standing by the counter, her bonnet tied, just so, the new sky-blue ribbon catching a shaft of pale sunlight from the window. The mainstream fact is plain. In this period, dress is deliberate. A young woman might add a touch of brighter colour in winter to stand out against the darker tones of cold-weather clothing. A gentleman might wear his best overcoat, often wool, sometimes lined with quilted silk, to suggest prosperity without appearing ostentatious. Historians still argue whether courtship dress codes gave women more agency, allowing them to signal interest subtly through choices like fabric or trim, or whether such codes only narrowed the range of what was acceptable. Either way, you both know the rules, and you both know how to bend them. The fringe tidbit? Some men carried a second pair of gloves, finer, softer, just for social visits, changing into them before knocking at a door. A scuffed working pair might be perfectly good for the day's chores, but not for offering a hand in a parlour. As you talk in the store, you can't help but notice the tiny details. The polished boots, the neatly mended hem on her skirt, the faint scent of something floral that seems to defy the cold. You're suddenly aware of your own coat, your hat brushed clean, the knot of your scarf resting just right. Outside, the frost makes the boardwalk slick, so you offer your arm. It's a gesture that straddles courtesy and intimacy, and when she accepts, it becomes part of the conversation without adding a single word. People will notice, of course. They always do, but that's part of the point. In a season where the world seems to contract into warm rooms and lamplight, every choice about how you appear, and with whom, is as much a statement as anything you might say. The overcoat and bonnet have done their work. Now comes the moment when appearances give way to something heavier, the dinner table. Family dinners in the 19th century are not casual affairs. They are tests disguised as hospitality, evenings where every clink of cutlery might as well be the gavel of a judge. You arrive just before dusk, boots cleaned, coat brushed, a calling card already left on the tray in the hall. The dining room smells of roasted meat, fresh bread, and something faintly medicinal from the winter spices in the mulled cider. The table stretches beneath a linen cloth, candles flanking a centerpiece of evergreen sprigs and polished apples. The mainstream fact, a suitor's presence at a family dinner often meant the courtship was advancing towards something serious. In many households, this was the stage when both families began their silent vetting, assessing everything from table manners to conversation topics. Historians still argue whether such dinners were meant to genuinely get to know the suitor or simply to enforce class and cultural boundaries under the guise of polite company. You take your seat, never before the eldest family member sits, and unfold your napkin in your lap. Across from you, she avoids meeting your eyes too quickly, a small acknowledgement that you are both on display. Conversation begins light, the weather, the preacher's last sermon, a neighbour's new barn. But as courses arrive, soup, then roast, then pudding, questions begin to edge closer to the heart of things. The fringe tidbit? In some rural communities, it was common for the family patriarch to deliberately ask the suitor to carve the roast, not just as a chore, but as a subtle test of steadiness and composure. A poorly carved joint could be joked about for years, which you suspect is exactly why you find yourself with the carving knife in hand now. Between questions, you take in small details. The way she glances at you when her father speaks, the nod her mother gives when you pass the bread without being asked, the younger sibling's smirk when you compliment the pudding. You're not just speaking to one person tonight, you're addressing an entire audience, each member deciding how well you fit into the picture they've already half drawn. When the meal ends, there's tea in the parlour and a general easing of posture. You've passed at least one test. You haven't been sent out into the cold without your hat, which is as good as an invitation to return. But you know as you walk home that the memory of every answer, every smile, every slice of roast will be weighed in that house long after the plates are cleared. The dinner may be over, but one ritual still lingers, letters. Not the brisk cost-per-word efficiency of the telegraph, but longhand, meant to be read slowly, maybe even aloud. Tonight, the lamplight in your room pools across the desk, catching on the curves of the pen nib as you set it to paper. Her voice is still in your head from the family table, her eyes across the flickering candles. You know she'll hear the letter in your voice too. The mainstream fact here is that reading letters aloud in the parlour was common practice, sometimes to share news, sometimes to invite the whole family into a story. This means that when you write to her, you're also writing for potential listeners. The trick is to choose words that feel like they're just for her, yet safe enough for the ears of an attentive aunt. Historians still argue whether this shared reading brought couples closer or forced them into public performances of intimacy. Your hand moves steadily across the page. I trust you and your family are well. I am grateful for the kindness shown at supper and for the conversation which lingers in my mind as warmly as the cider in my hands. You stop, considering. Too forward? No, just enough. The fringe tidbit? Some suitors embedded private signals in their letters by the way they folded the paper. A fold to the right might mean thinking of you. A fold to the left, hope to see you soon. Entire hidden messages could be sent without altering a single word. You add a closing line about the weather turning colder and the hope that she'll take care against the chill. Then you seal the letter with wax, amber this time, not red, so it looks less like an official decree and more like a warm note from a friend. When she receives it, maybe she'll open it in the parlour with her family nearby, reading your neat script aloud with a voice that's polite but hiding something underneath. Or maybe she'll wait until later, unfolding it alone, letting each sentence speak to her without an audience. Either way, the letter will travel farther than the miles it covers. It will slip into her day, her thoughts, and perhaps her keepsake box. Some conversations can't survive the stiffness of a letter. They need the immediacy of being in the same place, yet without the risk of seeming planned. That's where the accidental public meeting comes in, a tactic as old as small-town sidewalks. It's market day, the boardwalk crowded with women in bonnets carrying baskets, men with crates of produce balanced on their shoulders, and children darting underfoot like wayward chickens. You've timed your errands with quiet precision, knowing she often visits the grocer around this hour. And there she is, by the apple barrels, gloved fingers pressing gently into the fruit, as if testing for some secret worthiness. The mainstream fact, public spaces like markets, post offices, and dry goods stores were legitimate venues for chance encounters during courtship, especially in smaller communities where privacy was scarce. A conversation held there could be excused as incidental while still carrying layers of meaning. Historians still argue whether these meetings were truly spontaneous or the result of careful planning by one or both parties. You step closer, tipping your hat just as she looks up. The exchange begins lightly, remarks about the crispness of the apples, the early frost, the price of imported tea. But every word has weight. You lean slightly nearer to be heard over the bustle, and the scent of her bonnet ribbon, wool warmed by the sun, pulls you straight back to the church social in Section 7. The fringe tidbit? In some towns, couples would agree in advance to exchange small, easily overlooked tokens in public, slipped into a shopping basket or tucked under the edge of a folded newspaper. Today, it's a pair you select from the barrel, hand to hand, the brief contact covered by polite thanks. You both linger a moment longer than needed, letting the conversation drift into harmless gossip about the mill owner's new horse, before parting with the kind of nod that says, "We'll meet again," without setting a time. By the time you're halfway down the street, you can already feel the pull to circle back, just to see if she's still there, still pretending to examine apples while the real exchange has already taken place. There's a particular kind of intimacy that doesn't come from dances, dinners, or even long carriage rides. It comes from sharing a book. In the 19th century, books are expensive enough to be treasured and scarce enough to pass from hand to hand like rare fruit. When you lend one, you're not just offering paper and ink. You're giving a piece of your own thoughts, an invitation to inhabit your mind for a few hundred pages. It's a rainy afternoon when you find her in the corner of the reading room at the local library. a place that smells of dust, leather bindings, and the faint sharpness of lamp oil. She's thumbing through a worn volume of poetry, her gloved hand resting lightly on the open page. You greet her softly so as not to disturb the few other patrons bent over their newspapers. The mainstream fact: by the mid-1800s, circulating libraries and book clubs were central to middle-class social life, and book exchanges became a recognized form of courtship. Lending someone a book you loved, or that you thought they should read, was both a compliment and a test. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were more about genuine intellectual connection or about using literature as a safe vessel for coded feelings. You pull a slim novel from your own coat pocket, one you've finished but kept near because of a single underlined passage, the fringe tidbit. It was not uncommon for readers to pencil faint marks or notes in the margins, knowing the next reader might notice. Some marks were innocuous, others were essentially love letters disguised as literary commentary. You hand her the book, noting the slight surprise in her eyes. "You might enjoy this," you say, keeping your tone light. She takes it, her thumb brushing the edge of the pages. Neither of you mention that books have a way of finding their way back to their owners slowly, giving both parties an unspoken excuse to meet again. Weeks later, when the book is returned, you find a faint pencil line beside the very passage you'd marked. No words, just a small, deliberate mark, enough to tell you she saw it, understood it, and wanted you to know. The book has come back to you, the penciled mark, a quiet echo you keep replaying in your mind. But courtship in the 19th century isn't just built on shared pleasures, it's tested in less polished moments too. And sometimes those moments arrive under the shadow of illness. It begins with a whisper in the town. She's taken to her bed with a lingering cough. In an age before antibiotics, such news carries weight. A cough could mean nothing, or it could mean weeks, even months, of recovery. You can't simply appear at her bedside. Propriety demands a certain remove. Yet, there are ways. The mainstream fact, tending to an ailing sweetheart in the 1800s was a deeply symbolic act. For women, it was often framed as nurturing, for men as steadfast devotion. Historians still argue whether these moments of care were more about genuine affection or proving oneself to a watching family. You visit the house, greeted at the door by a relative who informs you she's resting. You leave a small parcel, a jar of quince preserves wrapped in cloth to keep the chill out. The fringe tidbit? Quince was sometimes considered a courting fruit, thought to bring good health and affection when shared. In some communities, a suitor might send preserves or cordial as a subtle promise of both care and constancy. Over the next week, you send other tokens. A folded handkerchief with your initials stitched in one corner, a small bunch of wintergreen tied with twine, a letter written in a firmer, more optimistic hand than you feel. You picture her propped up by pillows, unwrapping each one slowly, the act of receiving becoming part of her recovery. When you finally see her again, it's on the porch, the colour returned to her cheeks. She thanks you without ceremony, her voice still soft from rest, but her eyes say more, that your quiet visits through doorways and parcels spoke louder than any words you could have brought to her bedside. Illness fades, the colour returns to her cheeks, and with it comes a change in the air. Soon the news doesn't drift through whispers. It's printed in black ink for everyone to see. The morning's Gazette lands with a soft thud on the porch, and there it is, your names, side by side, in the Society and Announcements column. The mainstream fact: by the late 19th century, local newspapers routinely published engagement notices, often with a level of detail that would make modern couples blanch. Names, families, hometowns, and sometimes even the wedding date. In small towns, the paper wasn't just an announcement, it was the official seal that shifted a relationship from speculation to certainty. Historians still argue whether these public declarations were a joyful sharing of news or a way of locking a couple into a commitment under the eyes of the entire community. You study the print, the type slightly smudged, where the ink bled into the fibres. It's only a few lines, but they feel like a proclamation. Somewhere across town she's holding the same paper, perhaps tracing her finger over the letters of your name the way you do hers. The fringe tidbit? Some couples cut the notice from the paper and kept it pressed in a family Bible between the pages of Psalms or Proverbs, letting it yellow gently over decades. Others mailed clippings to distant relatives, each folded in the neat square way that made it obvious what was inside. That day, the glances you get on the street are different, not speculative now, but confirming. Mrs. Grover at the bakery slips an extra roll into your bag for the bride-to-be. At the general store, Mr. E. Dalton slaps you on the shoulder with a grin that says he's been expecting this since the church social months ago. When you see her later, the paper folded neatly in her hands, there's a mix of pride and something quieter, an awareness that the private dance between you has just stepped onto a bigger stage. The porch, the parlour, the carriage rides, all of it now exists inside a frame everyone can see. Once the Gazette has carried your names through every kitchen and parlour in town, the next symbol is something smaller but no less significant, the ring. In the 19th century, an engagement ring isn't quite the universally expected custom it will become in the 20th, but when it appears, it's a visible, daily reminder of a promise made. You hold the small box in your palm, the weight of it disproportionate to its size. Inside, the ring rests on a fold of velvet, gold, modest but warm, set with a single stone that catches the light in a way that reminds you of that sky-blue ribbon in the sunlight. The mainstream fact, during the Victorian era, diamonds begin to gain popularity in engagement rings, but many Americans still choose coloured stones or simple gold bands, sometimes engraved with initials or a date. Historians still argue whether the growing trend toward gemstones was about romance or the influence of aggressive marketing by jewellers. The fringe tidbit. Some couples of modest means used a keeper ring first, a plain band to signify the engagement, then replaced it with a more elaborate one after the wedding when finances allowed. Occasionally, the keeper ring was worn alongside the wedding band as a double guard against loss. When you present it, you do so without fanfare. The setting is quiet, no crowd, no newspaper, just the two of you on the front porch in the amber light of late afternoon. She slips off her glove, the bare skin of her hand pale against the darker wool of her coat, and you slide the ring into place. For a moment, neither of you speaks. The air is cool enough that your breath clouds between you, but the warmth in your chest makes it easy to ignore the chill. She turns her hand, watching the way the light shifts on the band. It isn't ostentatious, but it's hers, and now so is the life you've both been building in quiet, careful steps. Somewhere behind the closed door, a chaperone or a mother may already know, but for now, the moment belongs entirely to you. The ring has found its place, and with it the calendar grows teeth. Days that once drifted like porch rocker minutes now click forward with a purposeful tick, as if the aunt's knitting needles have seized control of the town clock. You discover that an engagement isn't just a promise, it's also a logistics problem. Wearing lace, there are fabrics to choose, notices to send, cakes to negotiate, and 100 tiny decisions that all pretend to be small while secretly auditioning for most important thing in the world, in your nervous system. The house hums differently now. In the parlour, patterns are folded across chair backs like maps to a new country. Upstairs, a chest opens and closes with the soft thuds of a future assembling itself. Chemises edged with careful stitching, stockings rolled in pairs, a night wrapper that makes even the word wrapper sound like a scandal if you say it too close to the door. This is the trousseau, part practical kit, part hope chest, and it has a way of tugging everyone's attention into the same quiet orbit. The mainstream historical fact, trousseau in 19th century America range from modest stacks of hand-sewn linens to lavish collections of dresses, shawls and embroidered tablecloths, often built over years at sewing circles and family bees. The making is communal, the wearing private. Historians still argue whether these communal labours gave women material leverage, a store of goods that travelled with them, or simply rehearsed the duties they were expected to perform in a new household. You moved through it all like a respectful comet, near enough to glow, far enough not to combust. Still you're drafted into errands. You carry a bolt of muslin home with reverence, as if it were a holy relic. You fetch more pearl buttons than any one life could possibly require. You learn the difference between ecru and ivory, and vow never to disrespect either again. Light joke 1. Somewhere your old telegraph operator gently taps, "Who are you and what have you done with my customer?" There's the matter of the dress, of course. White is in the air. Not mandatory, not yet, as Queen Victoria's 1840 choice still floats across the Atlantic like a long, lacy cloud. In your town, some brides still marry in their best-coloured dress, practical and re-wearable. Others tilt toward pale shades and trims that whisper of the new fashion. Orange blossoms, real if the supply chain smiles, wax if it doesn't, make their fragrant case at the milliner's, arguing for innocence in the language of petals. The fringe tidbit? Wax orange blossoms often live on after the ceremony, arranged under glass domes on mantels so long that generations of children grow up believing the blossoms are native to parlours. Paper, too, has its day. The Gazette prints a formal announcement now, more polished than the engagement notice, as if the town itself has decided to straighten its tie. Handwritten invitations begin their tidy migration across fences and along rural routes, tucked into baskets of eggs or wedged respectfully into doorframes. In some places, the wedding banns, public announcements read from the church pulpit, still serve as official warning and community consent. In others, a civil license suffices. You can feel the turn of the era in these choices, the way old customs and new paperwork shake hands with slightly forced smiles. Your farewell courtship becomes a series of brief, distilled meetings, as sweet and compressed as telegraph lines, but far warmer. The porch is busier now, cousins arriving with thread and opinions, neighbours returning borrowed cake tins. So you learn the art of the side conversation, a glance exchanged at the water pump, a sentence snuck into the seam between errands, a laugh shared on the back step while someone inside declares war on a batch of icing. You're both careful because privacy shrinks as the date grows close, but you're also bolder because the window is closing and you want to hang something beautiful in it before it's gone. Gifts multiply on side tables, a crocheted antimacassar with a will of iron, a teapot that looks like it could conduct seances, a quilt pieced by half the town, its fabrics a ledger of lives, Mr. Dalton's old waistcoat, Mrs. Grover's apron, a square of lavender print that looks suspiciously like the ribbon you chose what feels like a lifetime ago. Each gift arrives with a story attached and a suggestion about how to live, helpful or otherwise. Light joke 2, use this butter mould only on Thursdays, is astonishingly not the strangest counsel. Your last unwed errands have a ceremonial sheen. At the jeweller's, you try on the plain gold band that will one day live beside the engagement ring. It's unassuming, heavier than it looks, the way responsibility often is. The proprietor offers to engrave initials inside, one small possession that faces inward, readable only to the wearer and occasionally to a very nosy grandchild decades hence. You say yes. The letters curl privately where your skin will learn them by heart. There's cake to consider. The mainstream fact again puts on an apron. In the 19th century, wedding cake is frequently a dense fruitcake wrapped in symbolism and alcohol, sturdy enough to survive a season and potent enough to subdue an uncle. Slices are sometimes mailed to distant relatives, edible telegrams, while a few pieces get tucked away to be nibbled on a first anniversary, proof that sugar can hold hands with memory across an entire year. Historians still argue whether the cake's endurance was about thrift, ritual, or the beer-like miracle of preserved fruit baked into domestic resilience. Rehearsals aren't exactly a thing yet in your town, but practice finds a way. You walk the short aisle of the empty church with the minister, marking the pace that will keep you from sprinting past your own vows. You stand at the front and imagine the pews full, the candlelight steady, the organ's first chord tying the room together. Your mind flickers with callbacks, the calling card tray that started it all, the fan's secret alphabet, the duet that turned fingers into a language, the mayor's steady judgment on the bridge, the peppermint treaty cracked in the dark. It all seems to have been pointing here with the patience of a metronome that finally believes in crescendos. And yet in the middle of bustle you steal a quiet evening, because the outline of this whole thing promised it, a farewell courtship, one last walk at a pace that belongs to no one's timetable but your own. You meet at dusk, as you did so often, and choose the long route past the mill, where the air still carries that sawdust and river scent, then over the boards that answered you on the night the moon made geometry of a profile. You talk about plain things. The new stove that hisses if you don't coax it properly? How many jars of quince are left? Whether the metronome can be smuggled into married life without the aunt's permission? And you talk about nothing, which is really everything. A question drifts between you. What changes when vows are said? The world will say everything, the way newspapers do when they're feeling poetic. But you suspect the answer is enough to bind your days to a common ledger, enough to turn my into our on the labels of flower and time, enough to make a duet the default even on evenings when the piano is shut. Historians still argue whether marriage in the 19th century narrowed women's autonomy too tightly or opened new rooms through partnership and household authority. You don't resolve it, you only promise to argue kindly, in good faith, with fresh tea and better pie. On the way back, you stop by the churchyard gate, where honeysuckle has exactly no respect for boundaries. You stand close, the way engaged people are permitted to stand when a wedding is near, and the town has already written your names together in ink. You don't kiss, the century still has rules, and anyway the moment is full without it. You share a silence that feels like a held note from your old nocturne, sustained until it becomes the room itself. The night before the wedding, sleep pretends it will attend and then sends its regrets. You lie awake, counting not sheep, but small mercies, the aunt's coughs that steered you away from bad sentences, the patience of the horse, the way a blue ribbon found new light at every turn, the inspector-level vigilance of Mrs. Pemberton's gossip, which, to be fair, taught you to choose your steps. You remember the invisible ink of lemon juice and smile at the idea that vows are just the visible portion of a long, hidden message. Light joke 3. If only you could warm the marriage near a candle now and then to reveal where you put the good scissors. Morning will bring its ceremony. A slow walk, a steady voice, a hand offered and returned. Cakes will be cut, gloves pulled on and off, and someone's uncle will tell the same joke twice because tradition demands it. But tonight, on the edge between promise and practice, you savor the last hours of courtship as if they were the last measures of a favorite song. Aware that another movement is coming, equally beautiful, differently scored, and waiting patiently at the turn of the page. Morning arrives, dressed in its best weather. The light spills across the town like it's been saving itself for this day, brushing the church steeple, the clapboard houses, even the dust on the road in a soft gold. By the time the bell rings the hour, the pews are already filling. Neighbours, cousins, the milliner who sold the ribbon, Mrs. Pemberton with her latest report disguised as a congratulatory smile. The mainstream fact in 19th century America, weddings vary widely depending on class, location, and denomination, but many follow a similar spine: ceremony in the church or home, followed by a reception heavy with food, music, and the ritual of public congratulations. Historians still argue whether the formality of the event served as a safeguard for vows or simply as another display of social standing. The air inside the church is cool and faintly floral. Orange blossoms, real and wax alike, are tucked into garlands near the altar. The organist runs a few last chords while the minister flips through the pages of his notes. The fringe tidbit? In some towns, the bride's bouquet wasn't just for show. It was dismantled at the reception, with sprigs given to unmarried guests to tuck away for luck in their own romances. You take your place at the front, watching as each guest finds their seat. The aunt is there, knitting needles finally still, the metronome of all those earlier evenings now resting. The calling card tray from that first visit is probably still on the hall table at her house, but today it's irrelevant. The invitation is public and binding. When she appears at the end of the aisle, it's as if the months have folded in on themselves. You can see every stage of courtship stitched into this moment, the fan's deliberate angle, the duet's brush of fingers, the mare's slow pace across the moonlit bridge. The ribbon is there, woven into her bouquet, catching the light the same way it did in the milliner's shop. The vows are spoken clearly, but you hear them layered with every unspoken promise you've both kept so far. When you slide the gold band onto her hand, it clicks gently against the engagement ring, a sound so soft only the two of you notice. Outside, the reception unfolds in a blur of handshakes, laughter, and slices of dense fruitcake that could, by design, survive until your anniversary. Someone produces a fiddle, someone else a jug of cider, and before long the yard is full of music and the sound of skirts sweeping across grass. A few guests clink forks against cups until you oblige with a quick kiss, chaste by 21st century standards, but enough to draw cheers. As the day wanes, you find a brief pocket of quiet on the porch, the same one where so much of this began. The air smells of late summer fading into autumn. Somewhere inside, your names are being repeated in congratulations, the syllables already starting to feel like they belong together. The wedding day fades into its own kind of haze, voices, music, the rustle of skirts and the creak of carriage wheels blending together until it feels like you've stepped out of a painting and into another life. The morning after, the air feels different, quieter but charged, like the first still moment before a summer storm. Your first days together aren't the storybook idyll the neighbours imagine. They're a blend of small adjustments and discoveries, where the teacups live, how to bank the fire just right, the fact that she hums softly when she folds laundry and that you tend to whistle when you read the Gazette. These things were invisible in courtship. Now they're the architecture of your shared days. The mainstream fact: in 19th century America, newlyweds often moved directly into the husband's family home, especially in rural areas. Privacy was rare. Establishing a household apart could take years of saving or the passing of property from one generation to the next. Historians still argue whether extended family living was a stabilizing influence or a constant negotiation of personal boundaries. You're among the fortunate or the ambitious because you've started in your own small home. The furniture a patchwork of gifts, hand-me-downs and a few new pieces that still smell faintly of fresh varnish. The calling card tray has pride of place on the hall table, not because you expect callers immediately, but because it feels like an emblem of where this all began. The fringe tidbit? Some couples kept a visiting journal alongside their card tray, noting who came by, what was discussed, and what refreshments were served. It wasn't nosiness, it was record-keeping, a polite archive of social life that could be consulted when reciprocating calls or sending invitations. Your days settle into a rhythm. There are still public appearances, Sunday church, market day, but now the glances from neighbours carry a different weight. The speculative curiosity has softened into something warmer, as if everyone has decided the story they've been following has reached a satisfactory chapter. And yet in private moments, you both find ways to keep the courtship alive. A book left open to a marked passage, a pressed flower between the pages of the family Bible, a ribbon retied at the brim of her bonnet, not because it needs it, but because you like the way it catches the light. These first weeks are quieter than the months that led here, but no less deliberate. The pace has changed, but the dance, the careful, attentive way you move around each other, remains. Weeks turn into months, and the life you built in small gestures begins to feel like it's always been here, woven into the grain of the floorboards, the ticking of the mantel clock, the steady hum of shared routines. The bustle of the wedding is long behind you, but the threads of courtship haven't vanished. They've simply been stitched into daily life. The mainstream fact: in 19th century America, the early years of marriage often balanced romance with practicality. Couples faced the work of managing a household, navigating finances, and fitting into the broader web of family and community expectations. Historians still argue whether marriage deepened affection through shared labor or dulled it under the weight of constant responsibility. There are small triumphs: planting your first kitchen garden together, hosting a neighbor for tea without burning the scones, finding a second-hand rocker that creaks in perfect counterpoint to the one you already have. The calling card tray sees more visitors now, its edges worn from the constant placing and lifting of small rectangles that carry the whole weight of politeness in embossed ink. The fringe tidbit? Some couples in the 1800s kept a memory drawer in their home filled with the talismans of their courtship, calling cards, pressed flowers, ribbon scraps, even a single glove. It was less about nostalgia than about keeping a private archive, a reminder of the moments that built the foundation they now stood on. On quiet evenings, you sometimes return to those mementos. You find the ribbon from the milliner's shop, still holding the faintest trace of lavender. You remember the peppermint passed back and forth on the bridge, the duet's fleeting brush of fingers, the mare's steady gait under the moon. She remembers the folded calling card, the picnic's hidden flower, the marked line in a shared book. You both remember the metronome pace of a courtship that moved in deliberate, careful measures until it was ready to run. Now, in the soft lamplight, the pace slows again, not out of caution this time, but out of comfort. The year turns, as it always will, bringing seasons that will shift your routines, challenge your patience, and give you new things to tuck into the memory drawer. And somewhere in all of it, you'll still find the time for a walk after supper, a glance over the brim of a teacup, a hand resting for a moment too long on the back of a chair. Gestures that carry the whole weight of your shared history without needing a single word. So now, with the story told, you can let the room grow quieter around you. Imagine the soft creak of that rocker on the porch, the rhythm slowing until it matches your own breathing. Outside, the night is cool but not cold, the air touched with the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The streets are empty, save for the occasional echo of hooves far in the distance, a reminder that the world keeps turning, gently, while you rest here in this moment. You can picture the two of you, not in the bustle of a market or the hum of a parlour, but in the easy calm of a shared home. There's a lamp on the table, casting a warm pool of light, a cup of tea cooling slowly beside an unread book. The ribbon is still tucked in its place, the calling cards still waiting in their tray, and the little mementos of your courtship resting quietly in the drawer, breathing the years in and out. The house itself seems to settle with you. The clock ticks, unhurried. The fire in the grate softens to a glow. Even the chairs seem to lean a little closer together. In this stillness, all the bustling seasons of your courtship feel like they're right here, folded neatly into the walls and floor, ready to be taken out and remembered whenever you choose. And with that thought, you can let the edges of the day blur. You've walked through parlours and orchards, down boardwalks and moonlit roads, through the measured dance of 19th century romance. And now you can rest in the certainty of where it all led.